Thank you for your presentations. I have one question for Verena. I am still, but in some same situation or very similar situation as you. I have been in contact for years, decades with a few Holocaust survivors. One passed in 2015 and one will be 93 this year. And my question is emotional, ethical, methodological. When you are in such an intensive relation for years, so you became friends, yes, somehow. And and how you deal with this back in your analysis and interpretations when you need to like differ what was said to you as for researcher and what was for friend, and also how you interpret some things that are not very nice about your interviewee friend, but they are very important to put it to the interpretations because it is then complex and correct. So this is what I was dealing with when I tried to write one article about my Holocaust survivor friend who passed. So therefore, the question.
Thank you. Also, I have just a few questions for the 12 minutes to Monique. I'm sorry, maybe it's my lack of knowledge, most probably, but how is it these testimonies working in a way? Because at least in Hungary, before you make any kind of testimonies or discussions, at least that's the situation now, you have like 2 to 3 options depending on the archive you are going to submit, and one of them is that they decide to whom it can be accessed. So it's not really participatory as you proposed, but still they have the right to decide who are the ones who are able to reach the whole text or part of the text, or if the survivor or anyone interviewee have the right to read first and then anyone can have access to the next one level. So how it used to be and how is it the situation now in terms of who gives what level of rights to use the text? Thank you.
I think I have 2 comments. One is about not giving survivors a voice, which is a Swedish example, is a strong one. I mean, we will take your testimony, but we will not let anyone hear it. By the way, I think not giving survivors a name. For example, if I will say about the Fortune archive, I can say free. The fact that you can't quote the full name of the interviewee, so we have to find the original testimony taken in Israel, and then we can quote the full name of the interviewee, because we want to write a paper about that person specifically. So taking survivors' names or whole testimonies away from them, I think this is counter intuitive to the whole idea of what we are doing. The other thing is that this is for Yael. This is not, I mean, it's nice to hear your name all the time on the PowerPoint, but actually I think you come from interpretive studies, we come from history. There were no Israeli historians at that time. No one was Israeli. Dinu made Aliyah 20 years before. Shaul Ash in Yad Vashem was a child escaping Germany. He lost his parents in the Holocaust. Spector came from Bologna. These people, there were no Israelis. So this is one thing. The other thing is that the survivors themselves, they weren't of the same approach to testimonies. I did write a paper about the arguments, but I'm saying that if we look at Blumenthal was an MA in literature, was a literature teacher. He looks at it not as an historian. The others are historians. Kermish is an historian. He's not an oral historian, he's a regular historian. And so he sees this totally different, and I think we should be just aware of this, not to put our today's definitions on it. This is not one body, these are different people and different cultural assumptions and professional. And Israelis generally don't believe that they were really Israelis at the time. Okay.
To about Sweden and about Neuendorf. I've interviewed a woman who was in Neuendorf. She was Orthodox. She remained Orthodox, and I've interviewed her. She lives here in Israel still, and very interesting. She actually wrote. She wrote a Jewish calendar while she was in Auschwitz. She composed one, having learned how to write a calendar from Kissinger's cousin in Germany when she was in school. But I'm just wondering if you encountered the subgroup of Orthodox youth who were in Neuendorf. And secondly, about Sweden, I've also interviewed and written about the subgroup of Orthodox girls in Sweden, in Lidingö, and also have a neighbor in Netanya who, I've interviewed many, but I have one neighbor still alive who is in Lidingö, in this Orthodox school for girl survivors. So I'm just wondering if either of you have encountered that subgroup of Orthodox girls or Orthodox Jews.
I begin with the end. Yes, I have come across this Orthodox group. I think, as far as I remember it right, they were included into Neuendorf in '38. And I have lists of names. I don't know how vollständig, how complete, thank you, how complete they are. But yes, I came across this group, and I think, if I'm not wrong now, that Anneliese Ora-Borinski was one of them. Yes, and her memories are published in German decades ago, and I think will or have already been published by Yad Vashem. Then maybe you with the Orthodox group, or maybe should I answer this first?
On the Orthodox? No, I have not come across, but it was interesting to hear about Lidingö, because this is something that is really unresearched in Sweden also, and we just find out that there were around 14 or 15 schools for young adults or children after the Holocaust in Sweden. And right now in another project, I'm doing interviews every Tuesday with the widow of one of the teachers, Eli Getro, who was a teacher at another of those schools called Smedsborg, but that was not an Orthodox school. There was rather girls there who will later come here to Israel. And he was a member of the Hachalutz movement, so he was their teacher. But we don't know much at all about those schools after the Holocaust in Sweden. And we really need to do research about them.
And with regards to your question, yeah, very good question. I mean, I will not write a paper about him or about our conversations, because I don't see him as a case study, and I see him more like he widened my knowledge. And of course, there were details, let's say, I would never say them here, or maybe would very general say this, or and so on, about his time from then. And everything which he told me about the historical events, I mean, sometimes he mixed it up. I mean, all people mix things up. But the thing is, sometimes he mentioned some issues, and I dig deeper, for example, into a lead, into this process of choosing people, candidates for Aliyah. I mean, there were many more aspects, yes, or with regards to Riga and so on. So, but sometimes if you hear more private or intimate things, you get a wider picture for what was for people like him, and I found others important then. I give you only one example. I found some post-war notes. 41 to 46 to 47 to 48 to 49. I went through them, and of course we as historians know all the historical details which happened then in Palestine, in Europe, and so on. And it is never mentioned that the state of Israel was established, but it was mentioned that his daughter has been born. And he said this was the biggest event in the last years. So his daughter, and not the state. I mean, this is at least what he wrote down, of course. I have to read everything, still there's yet a lot to be done. But for this research, I mean, it opened maybe my eyes for the more everyday life aspects and not all these historical events which seem to be so important on this official level.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that you went for Blumenthal, because I was ready to be asked about Auerbach. I was discussing this with Stephen earlier, and I told him, you know, I'm a little afraid that some people will say she was not a historian, but I know some of them already classified her as a historian in an article from 2005, Kerry Friedman Goyen. So I was not ready to be asked about Blumenthal, but I think you included him.
I did, but when we talk about approach testimonies,
Oh.
it is obvious that he is looking, it's okay, we need this. I'm saying that there were other survivors, historians, who were trained historians, and none of them was trained in oral history. They approach this differently. This is...
Okay. All right. So we agree, actually.
Kermish and Blumenthal are friends, but they are not the same when they talk about documents.
Right. They're not from the same expertise. That's, yeah, I totally agree. And regarding when you said there were no Israeli historians, did you mean no historians of the Holocaust? Because it was just the beginning? Because
I'm sorry, there are no Israelis. There are hardly any Israelis. Read what are Israelis.
Oh, you mean that they were not born here, born and bred?
Born here.
Oh.
The most, many of them escaped from Europe. Some of them came after the Holocaust. They were not Israelis.
These came, Kermish, Blumenthal, Auerbach, they came after the Holocaust.
But Shaul Ash, who is he escaped from Germany. He didn't. He was.
Somebody who lives in Israel is Israeli.
So I agree.
No.
So in this sense, everyone is Israeli.
No,
and it's not Israelis and survivors, because survivors are the Israelis.
What my original intention was to differentiate actually between those from the Jerusalem school, the German school, those who were born in Germany, like Heilperin and...
It's more West student and Ost student.
Right.
More than Israelis and not Israelis.
By the way, first of all, I wanted to name my lecture, Are You Israeli? Because one day I asked him, Gerd, are you an Israeli? And then he looked at me.
Because you speak Hebrew, dear. Hachshara, Chalutz.
No, he didn't. He spoke Hebrew with a strong German accent, yes, and he never learned Hebrew. It was street Hebrew, yes. And I asked him, Gerd, are you an Israeli? And he looked at me. This was he said, do I look like an Israeli? And he said, he had a great sense of humor, and he said, I'm a Berliner. And he didn't even say he was German, he said, I'm a Berliner. And then
You can't argue with Berlin.
Yes. And of course with regards to Kennedy and all these things, yes.
I want to thank you, Lorena, Yael, and Elaine, for an interesting and important panel. I think all of us think like that. And see you all in the bus.
No,
Thank you.